Well, hello. How are you doing? Oh my god. I did a live stream last night. It was 3.5 hours long. I had a good time talking with people. We went into a lot of deep, abstruse topics. Is a great word. Nobody uses it anymore. Abstruse. All sorts of interesting words people don't use anymore. Because, of course, the entire world is following the plan of the movie Idiocracy. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie. It predicted the future nearly perfectly. Yeah. By the way, C, which is what the common anti-intellectual calls the speed of light, which is not a speed, but the hysteresis of the ether, is actually the hysteresis of the ether. 1 over C squared was a discovery by Charles Proteus Steinmetz. James Clerk Maxwell, excuse me, I said Charles Proteus Steinmetz, James Clerk Maxwell, as to the relationship he found between the magnetic and the dielectric. And the consubstantiality of both of those things is called electricity. Electricity, and I've been talking about this for years, and for the first few years, people thought I was just like making up something completely fantastical. It's like, why don't you go download some of those free books by Tesla, Faraday, Steinmetz, Heaviside, James Clerk Maxwell, where they talk about dielectricity. Yeah, it's a word that's been scrubbed, and I think it's actually been done on purpose. But the word dielectricity has been scrubbed from the vocabulary. And I've had even a lot of electricians say, you know, I'm a master electrician. I've been doing this for 30, 40 years. I've never heard of the word dielectric. You know, they think in terms of electricity, and there's a lot of things people don't understand about electricity. And Charles Proteus Steinmetz said in his book, Electrical Discharges, Waves, and Impulses, I think it's on page 16, that they've, and that book was published in 1917, so over 100 years ago. So over 100 years ago he wrote in that book that they had complicated electricity to the point of making it so convoluted that, you know, it would make your eyes cross, even if you were an electrician. He didn't say those words, but he essentially said that. He overtly complicated it. If you actually understand what electricity is, which is the consubstantiality of dielectricity, what do I mean by consubstantiality? Well, red light is the consubstantiality, for example, of white light through a red filter. Blue light would be the consubstantiality of white light through a blue filter. In other words, it's two or more things. And that's what electricity is. And when you actually understand what it is, you can actually understand very simply how an electromagnet works. I made it actually a discovery, and neither Dollard nor Maxwell nor Tesla nor Faraday ever made anything within 1,000,000 miles mentioning that. And I'd like to talk about that in a second. And here's a diagram I made of AC power lines, either in front of your house or behind your house. And the actual field that exists between these alternating current power lines is the exact same diagram found in electrical discharges, waves, and impulses, and that's actually the secret diagram of the entire universe. But it's also to the cos representation that you see looking at a magnet underneath the ferrocell. And since simplicity is divinity, I can make it really, really simple. And I'll get to that in a second. Here's that diagram. I actually drew the red lines to represent the power lines. And the actual field parameters seen between those power lines is the magnetic and the dielectric field. You're actually looking at the cross-section of a torus or a donut. If you took a donut and you sliced it from front to back, you sliced it right down the middle, and you looked at that cross-section, you're looking at the cross-section of that donut. What you're not actually seeing is the dielectric, which are the dotted lines, and the non-dotted lines are the magnetic lines, which are circulatory. And the consubstantiality of both of those are basically the yin and the yang of the entire universe. Here's a diagram. This is from Charles Proteus Steinmetz's book. It's called The Electric Field or Circuit. Yeah, and these two together represent the superimposition of the magnetic geometry, which is toroidal, and the dielectric geometry, which is hyperboloidal, i.e. an hourglass shape. Yeah, I got an hourglass here somewhere. This is a hyperboloid. Yeah. The negative image of a hyperboloid is a torus, negative image of a torus is a hyperboloid, and the superimposition of both of those is the consubstantiality of what we call the electric field. But electricity is not a thing. Gravity is not a thing. Gravity is an anti-field. There's only two things in the universe, and everything else is a composite or an anti-composite of the magnetic and the dielectric. Magnetism, by the way, is a dielectric field, but the two of these things operating in unison, we actually have the transverse circulation of the force field, which is magnetism, and the opposite of a force field in dielectricity. Even Dollard gets it incorrect. He always talks about dielectric lines of force. Well, you can call them lines all you want, but I mean, lines are not things, but they're the total opposite of force, and the opposite of force is counterspatial or rest. But the superimposition of those, once again, we have the AC power line diagram here, where the AC power lines are represented by the red lines. The superimposition of those is the same geometry we actually see underneath the ferrocell. And it's the exact same conjugate geometry between the power lines. And I like to get to something kind of funny. I consider it to be incredibly funny. And I've heard every argument, and you can actually do a Google search or a Bing search or whatever you want and say, do electrons flow through power lines? And the general consensus, and of course there's no such thing as truth by consensus, because consensus is just another word for blathering nonsense, is that yes, that's what's happening. Now, there's a quote that actually Dollard made, and it's highly accurate. He said the power lines running behind your house, there's as much energy as several locomotives running through those. Of course, the word through is incorrect, but even he said there's not power or electrons running through the lines, but he just used the word through. The power of several locomotives passing, he should have said between, but it doesn't really make any difference, so splitting hairs. And the only thing that you know is happening is that the lines are slightly spread apart. Like if the power drops, they'll actually slightly swing together. They swing apart actually due to magnetism, and if you actually increase the voltage, they'll swing towards each other. That they're slightly spread apart and they're slightly heated. Now people think, well, that's proof that electrons are flowing through the power lines. Actually, the heat that's actually in the AC lines is due to the destruction or the feeding or the tapping off of the electricity that those geometries are actually carrying. In other words, all these homes are actually tapping off and sucking up the power for their ACs and, you know, their lights and everything else. That's the reason for the heating. They're not heated up because there's actually electron particles swinging through the lines. Someone actually said it, and this is funny, but this is actually what the so-called scientists think, that the wires or the power lines, or any power line, are like electron fire hoses. You know, you turn on your garden hose and, you know, you got water coming out. The idea, which is completely nonsensical, oh my God, it's working. This is high-tech special effects, the lava lamp over here, are electron fire hoses, and that's not the case. Here's one example of what someone said, because they know that's ultimately not true, but yet they come up with another thing that's basically the same thing as saying that. What travels through a wire is a shock front. Think of cars in a traffic jam that are standing bumper to bumper to bumper. You know, when you push the last car, the first one, kilometers away, also moves almost instantly. Now, since these people are atomists, they can't use the word instant, because in an atomic system, and relativity and quantum, which are both nonsense creations of atomistic, corrupt minds, instantaneous action at a distance, in atomistic systems, completely impossible. You can't talk about instantaneous action at a distance. For DC, that shock front moves only in one direction. For AC, the cars are moved back and forth. You know, they're all touching bumper to bumper to bumper. And that, I mean, that's the same thing. They're still basically making the argument when they say, no, it's not really like that. Electrons are not moving through it like an electron fire hose. They're still saying the same thing. They're talking about, like, all the atoms are touching, which, of course, no atom is ever touching. I mean, even these people will admit to that fact. They're still using the analogy of atomistic mind virus. But getting back to it, and by the way, the one thing that actually is suppressed and a lot of people started looking up stuff. They thought I was just making up this word dielectricity. They never heard this word before. I'm an electrician, and I've never heard the word dielectricity before. I'm going to go look it up. You know, these are the gods of field theory. Faraday, Tesla, Steinmetz, Heaviside, James Clerk Maxwell, Oliver, Eric Dollard, and others. They all use this word. You know, electricity is not a thing. Yeah. A cake, use a crude analogy, is not a thing. Of course, a cake has more than 2 ingredients. You know, a cake is not a thing in and of itself. A cake is eggs and batter and flour and all this other stuff. I mean, that's a cake. Electricity is kind of like a cake except with 2 ingredients. Not that a cake can have 2 ingredients. So we can't talk about, look, here's cake. It's like, well, that's nice and everybody loves cake. But that cake is composed of things. And to make the electricity analogy very simple, there ain't no such thing in Mother Nature as electricity. We have a word for electricity. But electricity, and Dollard will tell you this, and he got it from, it didn't come from Dollard, electrical discharges, waves, and impulses by the god of field theory, Charles Proteus Steinmetz. He was the dwarf who was bent at the hip like a boomerang, and, you know, big, gigantic, rolled Cubans in the pictures that you saw about him. He said phi times psi, i.e. the magnetic and the dielectric, the multiplicative of those 2 things in unison makes up this thing we call electricity. So electricity is not a thing itself, just as a cake is not a thing itself. Sure it is. There's the cake right there. It's like, yeah, but the cake is composed of things. You get my point? I think I made the analogy very, very succinct in pointing that out. By the way, the past few days and what's been going on here in the United States will tell you what nasty liars these people who have so-called authority actually are. I mean, have you ever seen so much lying in the past 48 hours? I'm making a point in an analogy. The people say, well, I have a PhD in physics, how dare you tell me what electricity is? Like, well, I'm quoting the gods of field theory, the people that actually invented our entire electrical grid. Tesla, Faraday, Steinmetz, Heaviside, James Clerk Maxwell, on and on and on and on. It's like you got a PhD hanging on the wall, but you have never defined energy, and you have never defined the term field, and these people never have. That's not my opinion that they never have. They never have. So, anyway, C is the hysteresis of the ether. It is not a speed, it is a rate of induction. Okay? This is why Nikola Tesla said light was a sound wave in the ether. Sound is not an emission. Sound is setting up a disturbance in the medium, that medium being the air. Light, just like electricity, and of course the 1 over c squared discovered by Charles Proteus Steinmetz was attributed, you know, to Einstein. Y equals mc squared is Einstein's discovery. Actually, Einstein didn't discover that at all. Not only did James Clerk Maxwell use it before him, but the first person to mention it, and there are many books about this fact, this is where Einstein stole it from, was a guy, his books are free download, called Henri Poincaré, like Henry. Henri, H-E-N-R-I, Poincaré, P-O-I-N-C-A-R-E, Henri Poincaré. Go look that guy up. He actually came up with that discovery, not Einstein. Anyway, voltage is to dielectricity, since electricity is the consubstantiality of dielectricity and magnetism. Voltage is to the dielectric, which is equal to capacitance, which is equal to counter space. This is why in AC power lines, if you increase the voltage, counter space would be the power lines swinging together, right? Well, when you increase the voltage, and this has been seen in lightning strikes, they strike the power lines, and of course lightning is electrostatics, dielectrics, they'll swing together because the voltage has been increased. Amperage is to the magnetic, which is equal to space, which is equal to force. And something that is spatial is, of course, a force vector. When you actually increase the amperage in AC power lines, they'll actually swing apart. Yeah, because there is a more toroidal energy, i.e. magnetic flux, which is equal to amperage, which is equal to force, which is equal to the spatial. The consubstantiality, or the multiplicative of the magnetic and the dielectric, makes up the thing that ignorant human beings call electricity. Magnetism is spatial. Dielectric is capacitance, and of course counterspatial. Magnetism would be crudely the punch or the size of the needle, whereas the dielectric would be the needle. Anyway, dielectric is voltage and magnetic is amperage. By the way, in so-called AC power lines, there's no continuous wire between the power station and your house for the energy to reach you to drive your devices and your AC and your lighting and so forth. There are several, several actually, physically separated wires along the way with gaps in between them. These gaps, of course, are present in each and every transformer that increases or decreases or steps up or steps down the voltage. This is the case even in a vacuum. Now, you should never do this, but you can actually take an inductance coil and tap off, and there are many places and many countless video examples of this being done, where enormous amounts of power, depends on the proximity to the lines. It's very dangerous. Don't ever do this. You're able to tap off a large amount of power. Now, and these people will tell you that, is there electrons? Is electricity the flow of electrons? Yes, it is. I have a PhD, and look at that PhD right there hanging on the wall. I said, well, how does wireless power induction work? They won't answer it. Well, it works the same in a vacuum. You know, I thought you said that electricity was the flow of electrons. What is? Well, it doesn't work out. Because these people, their mind is completely upside down and backwards in this relativistic quantum, which is, by the way, quantum comes from the word dielectricity, i.e. a quantity. A quantity is not a thing, but that's a matter for another discussion. An inch, a mile, a meter, a pound, a volt, you know. These are measures. These are not things. These are human measures, and a measure is not a thing. You can't point to an inch, a mile, you know, a foot, a pound. Sure you can. This weighs a pound. Not exactly. But a pound is a measure. You know, it's not a thing in nature. Nature has no idea what miles and pounds and kilometers and kilograms are. Measures are human creations and concepts. But they will tell you that that's what's happening. It's the flow of electrons, which of course is instantly explained away with wireless power induction or wireless power induction in a vacuum. Your Apple Watch is the same thing. It uses an induction coil. Your wireless toothbrush, you put it on the little charging thing. You know, since it's always wet from brushing your teeth, it has to be completely encased, and the perfect way around that is you plastic coat or rubber coat induction coils between the wireless toothbrush and its charging base. There is no flow of electrons there when your wireless toothbrush is charged, for example. And of course it'll charge in a vacuum if you stick it in a bell chamber and suck out the air. So this idea that these people have that the flow of electricity is the flow of electrons. Like, well, that's just not true at all. This is a mind virus of atomism. Mother Nature does not work off of atoms. Everything is fields, and fields are not atoms. By the way, I have never, ever denied fundamental particles, i.e. protons. Most fundamental particle, of course, is a hydrogen atom. Neutron, all free neutrons spontaneously become protons. This means a neutron is the phase modality of a proton. But every god of field theory, including Tesla, Steinmetz, Heaviside, Walter Russell, I don't know, they all said there ain't no such thing as an electron particle. They all said that. And when I say that, people go, well, how does an electron microscope work? Well, let's call it what it really is. An electron microscope, more accurately and scientifically denoted, would be an electrostatic reflectance imager. Should call it an ERI, electrostatic reflectance imager, which is exactly what a so-called electron microscope is. Ain't no such thing as an electron particle. I'm sorry you've been brainwashed by that nonsense. In public school, no less, but there ain't no such thing as an electron. The person that actually discovered this principle, J.J. Thomson, accurately described what the so-called electron is, which is not a particle. This is accurate, and this is where you should listen up. The guy that discovered it, by the way, he called the principle thereof 1 unit of dielectric induction. That is what human beings, modern-day human beings, are calling an electron. The accurate denotation of that idea, principle, observance, very accurate from J.J. Thomson. 1 unit of dielectric induction. The electricity is actually trapped between 2 dielectric reflectors or mirrors. This is actually very similar to what Dollard actually said. The power lines technically, and he never said this, I'm saying this, and it's more accurate, the power lines themselves in the AC current are circuit boundaries. They're circuit boundaries of the system of the conjugate fields between the magnetic and the dielectric. You can see this diagram from Charles Steinmetz right here. If you actually stick a power line down here, which I did, the power line is represented in yellow, and the power line is represented in red. They're the circuit boundaries that actually define the, and I'm the only person to say this and discover this. This is mine completely. You think that's egotistical, I don't care. See, these are the circuit boundaries of the magnet. The magnet is actually outlined in yellow, the physical magnet. Well, that's the exact same thing as that diagram from Charles Steinmetz. Those red lines would be the power lines. That's the exact field around AC transmission lines. They're circuit boundaries. They're actually counterspatial reflectors. There is not electrons traveling through power lines in your backyard. You've been brainwashed to that nonsense. You've also been brainwashed that when you turn on a light switch that is emitting light or photons. It's completely nonsensical. Light is not a wave, a particle, a wave-particle duality. There are no dualities in nature. It's not an emission. That thing that you call C is speed of light. 186,000 miles per second speed of light is the speed at which light travels. Well, light isn't traveling any more than anything is being emitted by somebody in the middle of a pond or a pool flapping their arms and creating disturbances in the water, which would be the medium. They'll say waves! I love it when they say waves. I say waves of what? A wave is not a thing. There ain't no such thing as a wave. Space is not a thing. By the way, space has never been the terminal for any field. Waves are not a thing. Waves are what something do, not what something is. These people are lost in just like a shadow. Shadow's not a thing. A shadow's an absence of shadow. Look, there's a shadow. Yeah, you're pointing out the absence of light. That which human beings conventionally call a shadow. Space, waves, time, shadows. These are not things themselves. They don't exist. Those are waves. Scientists love to use the word waves. Love it, love it, love it. Waves of what? Waves. Waves of what? Energy. Well, you never defined energy. Lines of force. Force of what, by what, upon what, and due to what. Lines? Lines are another conceptual abstraction. No, 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 no. The reason for the conjugate field of the AC lines is best for long-distance power transmission is that it mimics nature. And of course, the reason why it mimics nature, it's the conjugate field in perfect duplicate. This is the field around AC power lines. It's the exact same thing as that which is seen around the magnet. They are literally the boundaries of reflection. They're circuit boundaries. In the case of the magnet, it's the physical boundaries of the magnet. In the case of the AC power lines, they are the boundaries of the AC system of electricity itself. But once again, electricity is not a thing. Electricity is the hybrid consubstantiality between the magnetic and the dielectric. Magnetism is transverse and toroidal. Dielectric is counterspatial, is directed at counterspace. It's the reason why you increase the voltage on AC lines, they swing together. Counterspatial movement. When you increase the amperage, they swing apart. That would be a spatial vector or movement, of course. Amperage is to magnetism is equal to force is equal to spatiality. Because magnetism is a dielectric field. When you release some of that energy, it manifests as the dielectric field, or the three-dimensional force vector. The full three-dimensional extrapolation of a three-dimensional force vector is this neat little geometry called a torus. By the way, it's a neat little toy. It's called a TOROFLUX. It's basically a toroidal slinky. If I actually squish it kind of like this, and you were able to imagine in your brain the three-dimensional extrapolation of this, you'll see a three-dimensional force vector, basically an S. You take a piece of wire, you bend it into an S shape, you take each end of the S and you bend it inverse to the other. Then you have one line of the vector in full three-dimensional extrapolation, which makes this toroidal geometry. It's called a TOROFLUX. You can get them for like $14 on eBay or Amazon, for example. I'll actually put a link below to the TOROFLUX, actually. I'll put that in the description below, to the TOROFLUX. So this idea of lines of force, you know? See, asking a physicist, do electrons travel through power lines? Yes, yes, they do. Yes. Well, you know, that's dismissed due to wireless power induction, which everybody has seen, at least everybody's seen wireless power induction. Your Apple Watch works that way, your wireless toothbrush. You say, well, you know, that explains it away, you know, because you're able to tap electricity. That's not, it's dangerous and it's not legal, so don't even think of ever doing that. Well, okay, there's lines of force. Force is not a thing. Force of what, by what, upon what, due to what? Lines of what? Oh, field, energy. It's like, oh, those are two great words they'll always use. Or they'll use waves. Waves are not things at all. They've never defined a field. I'll tell you what a field is very, very quickly. A field is an ether perturbation modality, but they've never defined it. I'm the first person on Earth, by the way, whether you believe me or not, but if I'm lying, I'm dying. The first person on Earth that accurately, succinctly, and very compactly defined what a field is. The first person. No Greek, not Tesla, not Faraday, not Steinmetz. None of them. I dare you to go find where any of these people defined the word field. I dare you! I dare you! Yes. Egotistically, you can say it all you want. I'm the first person on Earth to define that word. Field. Very simply, ether perturbation modality. Boom! Very simple. They never define that word or the word energy. So this idea that, you know, the power lines or any power line are electron fire hoses. You know, they really do think that, and it's nonsensical, and it's not true. I hope I made this kind of short, sweet, and succinct. And by the way, the term dielectricity, what it means and its importance, has been hidden and been scrubbed from the world for the past 100 years. A few people tried to revive it because you can't understand electricity without understanding what dielectricity is. You can't understand scalar waves or Tesla's energy systems without understanding the dielectric. It's impossible! Tesla didn't work in electrical systems. He worked in dielectric systems and compounded dielectric systems. Anyway, if you like this video, I have a donation link below in the description. I read every comment. You know, hope you like it. Any donation is always warmly welcome. You know, if you hate it, let me know. I try to make this short, sweet, and succinct. You're talking about abstruse field theory, physics. Actually, it's not physics. It's very, very much so metaphysics, but I think I made it sweet and short and succinct. Thank you so much for watching. Lux Veritas. Bye-bye.